coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
And what's so paradoxical about trans visibility is that presumably a trans person wants to be seen as a woman, like a man who wants to be seen, like I am now a woman. But that's not really what the International Day of Trans Visibility is about. It's saying, like, I want to be seen as, I don't want to be seen as a woman. I want to be seen as a trans woman. Like, I'm not looking to fool you or to make you believe that I'm a woman or a man. I just want to be, I want you to know that I'm not one, but that I am one anyway. That the whole power dynamic. I want you to admit in front of me that I am what I'm clearly not. And that's my visibility. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I am your host for today, Seth Barron, managing editor of the American Mind, and I am joined by editor of the American Mind, James Poulos, and editor-at-large, Spencer Clavin. Well, I hope all our Christian listeners had a wonderful old-style Easter Sunday, known now in year 3 of the new style liturgical calendar as the International Transgender Day of Visibility. Many people grumbled about President Biden's official recognition of the day and what they claimed was a replacement of Easter in American society. But others pointed out correctly that March 31st has always been the International Transgender Day of Visibility. Easter, on the other hand, is a movable feast, and so should take a subordinate position in the calendar, properly speaking. Indeed, the International Transgender Day of Visibility was first proclaimed in 2009, now I'm quoting Wikipedia, by transgender activist Rachel Crandall Crocker of Michigan, citing the frustration that the only well-known transgender-centered day was the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which mourned the murders of transgender people, but did not acknowledge and celebrate living members of the transgender community. The Transgender Day of Remembrance, of course, is November 20, immediately following Transgender Awareness Week, the second week of November, which follows Trans Parent Day, the first Sunday in November. Yes, of course, Pride Month is June, and October is LGBT History Month. But the International Transgender Day of Remembrance the International Transgender Day of Visibility, forgive me, is the only LGBTQ holiday in all of March, which really makes its observance especially important. Okay, now facetiousness all aside, what did you guys think? I mean, you're both celebrants, in one sense or another, of the holiday of Easter. Did you feel like it was given undue attention by the president? I'm just curious about your takes.
Well, first of all, I think the existence of Transparent Day only makes more pressing the need for a Transgender Day of Visibility, since trans people are clearly vanishing from the visible light spectrum as we speak. If they're becoming transparent, I'm not even a dad, and I still managed to make that joke. I mean, look, liturgical calendar printer go burr, right? Like, this is so on the nose. Like many things in the Biden administration, it takes all the most maximalist left-wing positions and deprives them of even what shreds of sort of political savvy they had to just kind of blunder clumsily onto every possible landmine in such a way as to suggest that the outrage can only possibly be the point. Even if you sort of concede that trans people are somehow insufficiently visible in our media culture, a point which I would vigorously contest. But let's imagine for a second that we weren't, in fact, constantly confronted at every turn with trans this and trans that. And you say, okay, this is a holiday in our ever-growing, journey from Juneteenth to LGBTQ month to this and that. Even if you say, like, trans visibility is very important to incorporate in there, surely it's not lost on Biden at all that this is also Easter. And to throw out this Twitter announcement of the whole thing without even so much as acknowledging, I mean, you could even have said, this would, in my view, be a total travesty, but you could even have said, isn't it beautiful that Easter falls on the same day as trans visibility because Jesus preaches to love and accept everybody, or whatever hippie Jesus the left likes to imagine. You could even do that. And that would have still offended people, but at least it would have conceded the existence of the high holy day of the Christian liturgical calendar throughout the West. I mean, I know James is only now embarking on his Lenten journey, and perhaps it was the calculus of the changing of the moon that enabled them to land Trans Visibility Day on Easter. But this is kind of a piece with some stuff that we've been talking about a few times on the show, which is my genuine perplexity about what the strategy is here with the Biden campaign, because, on the border, on the economy, on basically every hot button issue where Trump really succeeds, Biden refuses to moderate even a little bit. And it does make a bit of a conspiracy theorist out of me in the James Lindsay mold to say this is designed to provoke the sort of extremism that they desperately need to be able to point to. This is designed to create out of Christians so much fury that they can finally have the villain that they long for and are desperate to invent if none is immediately forthcoming. And I guess they're just really hoping that people are going to get so crazy that they can legitimately say, oh, look, here's this guy that blew his top over this issue and they're all bigots and Trump's the biggest bigot. That's why you have to vote for us. That's all I can imagine.
Yeah, I'm wondering when we're going to have trans child serial killer manifesto day of visibility. I think we should. I mean, look, there are a lot of overly intellectual things to be said, and that I could say about the paradoxes of visibility and invisibility, and what even the term trans conceals more than it reveals. Nobody wants to see post-op images, much less in the flesh. The extraordinarily anti-natural disfigurement that is involved is not something that even at this moment of profound perversity, most people want to be made more visible. But what I think I will say is this: because of the repulsive and fearsome nature of a doctrine that encourages people to become what they are not through artificial means, most of what is wanted to count as visibility is words. It's not images. It's a day of it being impossible to pick up your phone and scroll through the endless feed of words without over and over again encountering descriptions and identifications and mentions and invocations of people who fall into the identity category in question. Much of what myself and others have been thinking about and meditating on during this Lenten season, and much of what doubtless those who have already passed through it this year have been meditating on, is the spiritual relationship between the visible and the invisible things of this world. One is not supposed to be walking around pouting visibly about the discomforts of Lent, be they forsaking a delicious bottle of kombucha, for instance, or forsaking meat, or forsaking whatever it is that you rely on as a crutch and an indulgence to get you through your day instead of relying on God. So this relentless emphasis on quote unquote trans is of a piece with the relentless emphasis on the visibility of words on the internet, and the bombardment of words, and the desire to move your identity to the top of the stack in the propaganda wars. All these things are very much of a spirit that is distinct and different from and hostile to the experience of spiritual discipline and communion with God that has been passed down to us in more or less unbroken form for thousands of years. So yeah, this is there are a couple different religions at play here, and some of them are focused very much on the visible, and the other is focused much more on the invisible. The hierarchy of the invisible over the visible is an important thing, I think, to bear in mind as we are all being increasingly forced to attend to the visible on the internet.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, people were saying, what is the political play here? How could this possibly advantage a struggling campaign? Like, are they really desperate to nail down the, 0.02% of the electorate that is trans, or whatever it is? I mean, these are already their voters. What is the point? And Spencer, the idea that they're looking to radicalize opponents, well, that is always a possibility. It does seem to tie in with a lot of what they do. But I'm kind of thinking, I mean, so much of the left's strategy and outlook is built on this idea, I mean, maybe it's inapt, but that the last shall come first. And that, this radical Rawlsian vision that, look, anybody who's on the bottom is there because they were put there. So it's our job to fix that, be that through reparations, through open borders, through International Trans Day visibility. It's almost like it doesn't matter what the political implications are. This has to be like this is the motive force. This is primary. So they, like, the logic of their whole movement demands that they pursue these what appear to be kind of suicidal political maneuvers. Anyway.
Yeah, that's astute. I mean, we shouldn't discount the possibility of real belief in, if not the abstruse academic theory behind transmaximalism, at least the imputed virtue, the imaginary virtue that you get out of picturing yourself as a champion for the downtrodden, and picturing trans people as the most virtuous downtrodden. I just want to say we briefly had my cat appear on camera as an advocate for feline visibility. He wanted to make sure that he's an ally, and he just wanted to make sure that cats weren't forgotten. But yeah, so there's that part of it, and there's also relatedly the fact that so much of what you would call, identity advocacy on the left is aimed not at the people who are ostensibly being protected, but at the people who get off on picturing themselves as the protector. So like, white liberal ladies that speak in hushed tones. I meet some of these people like, I'm sad to say, out about my day in Nashville in various contexts that come up in like hushed tones and say to me, aren't we concerned about the assault? And that's not about trans people or even gay people or whatever. That's about the person making the hushed, worried statement about how much she really cares about this or that disaffected group. So maybe there's an electoral benefit to just maximizing the excitement that sort of voter can get out of the Biden campaign, because then you increase turnout or encourage affiliation with Biden, who is otherwise just a notably uninspiring candidate. At this point, almost literally an inert candidate. You need somebody or something to make people who might come support him really get excited about, so they don't defect to RFK or just fail to show up or whatever else. Maybe
you have to get people excited about the blob, and that's by identifying with the blob. So blobbishness is good. The ability to just kind of morph in a protean way from whatever you are into whatever you're not, whatever you wish you could be, or wherever your imagination leads. That's the sales pitch, and it would be consistent with the Antichrist to say, hey, the moment has come. I'm going to solve all your problems, whatever it is that you want. I will be able to grant that for you. Everyone's wishes are going to come true. We're going to do it in peace and harmony. We're going to do it right now. And that's a compelling sales pitch when there are a lot of people who feel like they are just doomed or cursed or just stuck in whatever situation, whatever body they find themselves in, when the spiritual attitude is one of just aggressively rejecting or not understanding the gift of life and the gift of one being who one is. That all seems like a pretty big swing, even for the increasingly incompetent blob that we have and confront at various points in our real life. But if you follow the logic, I think that's just about where it leads.
James, your meditation on visibility and practicing your righteousness to be seen before men made me think about that passage where Jesus says, when you fast, as you do during Lent, don't mope around and look as if you're fasting, but wash your face and sort of smile and don't let anybody know. The whole point of all those instructions is that men only see sort of the outward show, but God, who sees in secret, sees what is absolutely true, and so doesn't need you to make a big display of your virtue. He will reward you for it in good time, in absolute terms. And it does strike me that that's the opposite of the philosophy that says, in order to really, truly be a woman, I need you to see me as a woman. That visibility is actually the whole philosophical premise of at least like post Judith Butler trans, because gender is not one of those realities that is objective and so can be seen by God and exists even if nobody recognizes it. And I've never really realized that passage is designed in some way to assert the kind of absolute reality of certain spiritual truths that are there and don't go away just because nobody sees them happening. Mm-hmm. And trans is kind of the opposite of that. It's like there is no stable spiritual reality except what we socially construct, and therefore the reality of my gender depends on your submission to my ideas.
And what's so paradoxical about trans visibility is that presumably a trans person wants to be seen as a woman, like a man who wants to be seen, like I am now a woman. But that's not really what the International Day of Trans Visibility is about. It's saying, like, I want to be seen as, I don't want to be seen as a woman. I want to be seen as a trans woman. Like, I'm not looking to fool you or to make you believe that I'm a woman or a man. I just want to be, I want you to know that I'm not one. but that I am one anyway. That the whole power dynamic. I want you to admit in front of me that I am what I'm clearly not. And that's my visibility.
Yeah.
That I'm not what I I mean, right? Isn't that kind of what it is?
And in fact, the instant you point anything like this out, suddenly it turns out that actually trans visibility isn't what we want, because the minute we get visible, you cretins and bigots start attacking us and literally murdering us figuratively, or whatever version of that you want. And so it really is like a level where the point is for you to be doing the wrong thing. Like the point is that like that video of the guy dressed up in a skirt was like, it's ma'am. Like that's kind of the vibe of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's really weird, because I mean I know trans people who can pass, who do pass. Yeah. And as far as they're concerned, I guess whatever. I mean, are they visible or are they invisible?
Do they care? I mean, like, are these people that would celebrate the Trans Day of Visibility, or do they tend to just
probably not? I mean, I don't know. Maybe they would, but that would kind of give away the show. I mean, isn't the whole point to pass? I don't really know. Well,
I mean, that shift is something that like James would probably can speak to this maybe more in a more erudite way than I can. But it seems like that shift is really indicative of something. Maybe a shift away from actual gender dysphoric people trying to negotiate some sort of livable settlement where they feel okay and basically look like and are not noticed as trans, away from that and into trans as in some sense a positive good, or abstracted away from people's discomfort with their bodies and into a more generalized idea that what we need always is to not be what we seem, like that we should be constantly acknowledging the wrongness of all our categories for making sense of the world or something.
Yeah, it's just obviously like such it's in some ways it's new and horrible and didn't exist until a few years ago, and that's kind of has an awesome power over people, and that's one reason why even the likes of we are giving this phenomenon many minutes of our airtime. But it is not all that new in the fact that it simply reflects like the profound like spiritual dysphoria that is a hallmark of life on this earth. There's a yearning, especially now, to go back to normal, whatever that means. And I think there's still like quite a bit of pain and suffering to be endured as people discover that, well, what do you mean by normal? Do you mean a world where the balance of distractions is sustainable enough to carry you through like the bulk of your years on Earth and leave you kind of wistfully wondering what it was all about on a beach somewhere with, Jimmy Buffett gently playing? Like, what is this normal of which you speak? What we discovered is that for all of the apparent normalcy of the 1990s, which we're already looking back on with very rose-colored glasses, it was not enough. In fact, that food was so limited in its spiritual nourishment that here we are today with people literally imagining completely unworkable identities in order to try to scrape away that hard layer of superficial normalcy that was inadequate to the longings and the fears and the unease that so many people did feel in the 90s and did try to express it through art and some other forms. So, in some respects, yeah, this is like a shocking new twist. But in other respects, I think it's important to just realize that, in a way, it's the same as it ever was. People crying out in anger and confusion and in envy and bewilderment as a result of things that they feel inside and have not been able to process.
Well, elsewhere in Ghost in the Machine news, we've had an interesting tidbit, kind of a piquant little news from our favorite company, Amazon, which of course owns Whole Foods. But they also have a store called Amazon Fresh. It's a grocery store that became noted for its Just Walk Out feature, where when you go in, you scan yourself in with your Amazon account. You walk around with a cart, you pick up whatever you want, and then you walk out without negotiating any cashier lines or self-checkout machines. And it was billed as like the magic of AI or RFID or some kind of techno wizardry would analyze your purchases, and then you would be billed accordingly. Well, now it emerges that the magic was in fact thousands of Indians scrutinizing you as you walked around the store, and they would zoom in on your product choices. The stores did have hundreds or thousands of cameras everywhere, and I think a lot of shoppers kind of sort of suspected that this might be the case, but in fact, yes, there were thousands of people sitting in rooms in India somewhere watching you shop and meticulously tabulating everything you picked up. So it turns out it was kind of like a Rube Goldberg cartoon or like an image of little men living in a pencil sharpener with hand tools, like getting,
like the guy that turns off the light when you open the
yes, yes, exactly. So I thought this was kind of we all thought it was kind of funny, but it seems ripe for I don't know, James. What do you have any kind of insights into what this says or portends for our great future?
I don't know. I feel a bit torn, honestly. I'm still sort of chewing it over.
Okay. I mean, to me, what it sort of reminds me of in a weird way is Theranos, like the Elizabeth Holmes project, where she, supposedly had invented this tiny little box which could analyze one drop of blood and tell you everything you need to know about your body. Mm-hmm. But in fact, it was too clumsy. I mean, blood work is like, you really need a lot of blood to do it. Can't really just do it in a little machine. So Theranos was in reality using just standard lab technicians to do the tests. So it reminds me of this because it's this idea that we have this great idea and it's so compelling that it kind of doesn't matter if we cheat a little bit and just use manual processes in the meantime while we get going. Like in the future, we'll certainly have this down pat, but for now, let's just have a room in India with 1,000 guys watching you shop and figuring out if you've got an app, if you got a Granny Smith or a Macintosh, and billing you accordingly.
Well, there is this fake it till you make it kind of ethos, and at its worst, I think it takes us right back to where we were a few minutes ago in this conversation, which is, oh, well, we have to mangle the 2-year-olds in order for future human beings to be these angelic super beings that are incredibly beautiful and can have multiple genitalia at any time, and it's really going to be incredible. But a few must suffer, and for you, that means that you think that you're going on a cutting edge shopping experience, but you're really just wandering the labyrinth of a collective consciousness of hundreds of thousands of invisible Pajeets. So, but look, this is, I don't know. I mean, I feel bad because for many reasons, really. Maybe life is getting to me. I don't know.
Just maybe one just feels bad. Yeah.
This is actually a leading answer to the question of how the US is supposed to like beat China at whatever, the quest for global domination. And, you know, it's like the British Empire had like whatever happens, we've got the Maxim gun and they have not. And like American policymakers are like, whatever happens, we've got a billion like Indians who are willing to do like terrible jobs for 5 cents an hour. And the Chinese don't have them. And that seems to be, I mean, you got very thoughtful and intelligent people, qualified, credentialed American patriots saying, sorry, we just need to import every single Indian that we can, because a lot of them are intelligent. They're either going to do the really tough jobs that Americans are too stupid to do, or they're going to do the really like zero dignity jobs, which Americans are also on.
Right.
And if we don't do that, then the population is going to wither up, and China is going to just kind of flood the world with signification or whatever. There is a logic to that argument, but it still doesn't make it very appealing. So, you know, in some respects, like this seems to me to just be an example of like, careful what you wish for, you might just get it. People's capacity to like create new kinds of suffering for themselves instead of like taking a risk on the suffering of like, perhaps there's some radically different way that we could, you know, perhaps we need to like reconsider our relationship to our desires, what we think are our strategic imperatives, like what we think is a crisis and what isn't. No, let's not interrogate any of that stuff. Let's just put ourselves through the ringer of like gradually transforming America into like a Potemkin shopping experience / collective consciousness mystery tour.
Yeah, Potemkin technology. I feel like it's probably sinful to find this as funny as I do, especially because it seems to involve, as you indicate, James, creating jobs specifically so that they can be eliminated by new developing technology. I mean, that is another level of like late stage techno capitalism. It's not simply our machine is going to render obsolete your fill in the blank, truck driving or writing or PR campaigning, but instead we're going to find subalterns halfway across the world if we have to, and create job openings where previously there were none, specifically so that they can, within however many years, be eliminated. Is just so perverse that it has that hilarity of evil in it that you know, is kind of irresistible. But the other part of it is, and maybe this is just me being insufficiently imaginative when it comes to, you know, Amazonian machinations, but it seems so much more convoluted than just like going to the self-checkout even and scanning the barcode, which, okay, a little annoying. Sometimes it gets wrinkled and you have to like talk to somebody to figure out how it works. But basically, that's a fine technology versus having people have to scrutinize like on site the volume of your melon or whatever. Like, it's not an innuendo, but like, how are these people? I feel like the next thing, is like for them to just be drilling holes in the wall and like peering through the aisles or looking through two-way mirrors. Like, why is it that this has to be redirected through this, like through the pipes in the background? And it must be, because we are trying to envision a future for ourselves by acting it out and insisting that it's already here. And that does seem to be of a piece with a lot of what it puts me in mind. This is a little bit of a deep cut, but it puts me in mind of this Owen Barfield philosophical dialogue. Barfield was kind of one of the kookier inklings. He was very close with C.S. Lewis, and some of his stuff is really good. In fact, a lot of it. But his philosophical dialogues get into like a lot of the Rudolf Steiner like anthroposophy that he was into. And he has this passage somewhere about there are actually two satanic powers. There's not just one. We know about Lucifer, but there's actually Lucifer and Ahriman. And the idea is, I forget which one is which quite, but it's Lucifer freezes and Ahriman burns. And so one version of the satanic attempt is to freeze people in old forms of life that have become outdated when the spirit is moving on and trying to do a new thing. So an example of this would perhaps be the attempt now to recreate the social conditions of the 1950s, desirable as they once were, when in fact the conditions of the world have changed so that even though we do need to recover a healthier relationship between the sexes, it's going to have to look somewhat different. So Lucifer would freeze us in a backwards idea about how the world should look. But Ahriman burns by dissolving tradition and trying to force us ahead into some picture of what God's future looks like by contriving all of these outward shows that really don't actually create the real inward situation. And so trans is a perfect example of Ahriman burns, because in Christ there is no male or female, and there is some sense in which our resurrected bodies are kind of, they supersede gender or something. But this is the attempt to create a sort of fleshly simulacrum of what in the future perhaps will be at some spiritual level true. I've always found this really kind of fascinating. I think that the amusing term for this is immanentizing the eschaton, right? That when you have a picture of how the end of days is going to look, you try to reify it in flesh in this forced kind of Procrustean way. And maybe this is an enormous stretch, but this stuff that you guys are talking about where you try to act out a cardboard cutout version of technology you hope will one day exist strikes me as perhaps part of the same impulse to mold a little sculpted version of something that we hope will become true spiritually in the future.
Well, I'm not really up on my inklings the way that you are, Spencer, but I do know a thing or two about the cultural attitude towards simulation, and I think that it is right that there is an attitude that is setting in, and it is, it's at a sort of higher psychological order than partisan politics. This view that well, if we can't have nice things, then at least we can have a simulation of nice things. If we can't achieve a good state, or if we've lost something and it's irrecoverable, the logic is that we should simulate it, and we should just reside in the simulation of that thing. So whether it's something that might exist in the future, or whether it's something from the past, whether it's a way of life or a kind of social experience, rather than accepting that it's over and we need to just forge ahead and take the risk, and take on the risk of whatever that is. We are getting to a point, I think, where people are sort of looking back and looking forward and imagining a bunch of things and remembering a bunch of things and thinking our best recourse is to just run a simulation of this thing, and it doesn't matter if it's real because we might not be able to access the reality anymore, or we might never be able to get there. So there is a bias developing against reality in that sense, and it is going to take a new kind of discipline to say no to the simulation.
I think a lot of this, though, is, I'm totally down with the metaphysical interpretation here. I enjoy it, but I think a lot of this is really a function of how venture capital works in Silicon Valley, where you fund heavily some nascent technology in the hopes that it's going to catch on, and so you're willing to accept a great deal of revenue loss. You guys aren't going to be able to remember this, and nobody seems to remember it, but in the late 90s, when Priceline first came around. Now everybody now uses Priceline for it's like an auction thing where you bid like, oh, I will pay this much to stay in a hotel, within 20 miles of downtown Los Angeles or whatever, and then they match you. But initially, it did groceries. And so you could bid, like, how much am I willing to pay for Tropicana orange juice or whatever? And then, so I would do this, and then I would go over to the grocery store, and I guess maybe I had it printed out. I must have had a printout, and I'd be like, okay, well, I already paid for this orange juice, and it was only $1.89. So, like, basically, like, venture capitalists were subsidizing my grocery purchases. And, and then, of course, it didn't, but it's the same thing with Uber and Lyft. Like, initially, those were like, you'd be like, oh, I can take a taxi to the airport for $6. Like, right. This is great. To get everybody into it. And now, of course, it's like, like the real costs are, you're actually having to cover the real costs.
Right.
I was telling you guys about this before, but when I was in India in 2008, I saw like a construction site, and there was a giant sewer pipe, like an iron pipe, like 12 inches across. And these two little kids were cutting it in half with a hacksaw blade. They didn't even have the whole hacksaw, just the blade. And, this would probably take them a week or two, but I guess it was cheaper than renting a saw, like a mechanical saw. So, it's like pharaonic. Like, this is what you do if you have unlimited labor. You just and enough cash to like fund whatever it is you want to do. So I guess this was like Jeff Bezos's experiment. And, for a couple of years, it made sense to pay 1,000 Indians to watch people shop. And now they've decided, well, that didn't work. We're going to move on to something else. I mean, this is what happens when you have like such massive concentrations of capital, I guess. Maybe it's efficient. Maybe this is the best way for it to work. Seems a little bit like, I don't know, like when Stalin would have them like throw wheat on top of snow with the idea that it was all going to create like four growing seasons or something. But
yeah, it is pretty grotesque, and I don't know, far be it from me to play the bleeding heart, working class union advocate or whatever, but there are limits even to my capitalism, and I just feel as if the whole thing where the dollar's a dollar does kind of end when you end up basically building like entire micro civilizations on the premise that you can pretend to have invented a new technology. I think we can, like, all as good capitalists, nevertheless draw the line somewhere before you get to that point. And it's a good point that, in order often to make these apps work, you hook people by subsidizing it. And then I think they call this the end-shitification of the internet, because then it gets worse, right? And that's what happens with Lyft, which, by the way, not only is it just as expensive, if not more expensive than a regular taxi, but now Lyft just lies to you. I know this because my car got stolen recently, and so I've been riding on Lyft everywhere, and it just will be like, we'll get your driver in 1 minute, and then it'll do a countdown down to 60 seconds, and then when 60 seconds is up, it's like just a few more moments for like another 5 minutes. Anyway, I just find it all very amusing, and it puts me in mind also of Sam Bankman-Fried, because wasn't the whole, who recently I guess got his sentence delivered, and it was pretty harsh, and his whole crypto like Ponzi scheme was kind of like this. It was like, we'll figure out the details of how this money will actually be acquired later. For now, we will just create an extremely persuasive illusion that convinces you there is money. And basically all the rest of the tech mumbo jumbo is just smoke and mirror designed to distract you. The paucity of that approach.
Well, while we're on the subject of over or underutilization of resources, the news has suddenly become filled with stories of squatters who have taken over empty or even temporarily vacant houses, changed the locks, and declared themselves the true possessors of the property. Adverse possession laws, which vary from state to state, and I guess municipality, often favor tenants and can require owners to go through an expensive process of eviction. In New York recently, there have been some notable cases, like this woman, people moved into her mother's house after she died, and she went to kick them out, and they claimed they had a lease, which I guess they didn't, but she was arrested for, trespassing. Then just yesterday or 2 days ago, like a bunch of Venezuelan migrants were found squatting in a basement somewhere, and they had guns and ketamine and cocaine and all this stuff. They were just let go. But there have been a number of cases, like in Atlanta. Apparently, this is just happening all over the place. There's like thousands of instances of people having moved into houses. Now, maybe these houses were foreclosed upon. I don't know, but it takes a significant amount of legal resources and time to evict people, because once you've established tenancy, meaning that you've been somewhere for 30 days, it's not a simple matter to kick you out. So I don't know. I don't know what this says. If this is, I'm not sure what the numbers really are, or if this is actually like a major phenomenon, or if it's just popped into the news lately. It says something to me about somehow it's, well, obviously there is like how a certain housing shortage in America. And I often wonder, well, how much of that is connected to the fact that we just opened the border and admitted like 8 or 10 million adults into the country who need a place to live, and how much of that is connected to the squatting. I don't know. What do you guys think? You have any ideas on this?
I mean, it's a big enough deal in the news that at least that Ron DeSantis just signed the property rights bill, right? So he's sort of saying, no, actually, we favor the people who own the house over the people that just happen to set up shop there. And the alternative, which does produce appalling consequences in a lot of those cases you mentioned, is another highly advanced case of this perverse logic that obtains on the left, where the subaltern is the primary object of our concern and attention at the expense of, explicitly at the expense of, just kind of basic life. And sometimes, right, it's ambiguous and you get actual contested property cases, but sometimes you just get people coming in and saying, like, I have a lease on this property, and they can't show it to anybody, including the police. And then whether or not that's even remotely legitimate, depending on the state you're in, if it's New York, you have to go to court basically over this, which strikes me certainly as an instance of, the trial being worse than the conviction, that the law itself is so kludged and so convoluted that it makes just basic life impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that the fact that we are constantly being flooded with new people and also have no good policy on homelessness in most places and are constantly doing the things that produce the opposite from their stated effect or intention must be playing into this. I also think that probably these cases get more attention when we're all feeling a little bit on edge about social decay, right? Because that sort of seems like, whether or not these are sort of isolated human interest cases, which I doubt, or whether they are more pervasive, which seems likely given the other demographic changes we're undergoing. They're certainly emblematic of just a general sense that living a normal, upstanding middle-class life is the criminal act now. Whatever the law itself says, that's what's been criminalized. And I mean, that is like a recipe for profound social dysfunction.
Yeah, not a ton to add here. I mean, just to go back to the shopping experience inside the secret collective consciousness, like the lies of the internet are increasing. Getting right at the top with Google's search, page one of Google search is just ads, and it's ads that are there to push you in a particular direction. Gone are the days of like 84 gorgillion search results, and you can click through all the 84 gorgillion pages and see what's out there in the library of the internet. The internet is not a library anymore. It's becoming a little fraudulent, and you can see it in Airbnb listings too, where the pictures look pretty good and you show up and it's like not as advertised. I'm starting to hear things about, people who get mischarged and then they try to contest it, and Airbnb doesn't care. Some real estate markets that were really hot, a lot of people bought, and they tried to, instead of flipping the properties, they would just like, oh, I'll just Airbnb this, this $900,000 house that I bought somewhere in some Sunbelt metro area, and I'm going to be able to sit back and just watch the rents pour in. And it's not really working, and they have to convert these things into rentals. And there's a lot of chaos in this area of where housing meets the internet. And there's, I think, a lot of uncertainty around who's buying up the houses, whether it's BlackRock or, what used to be really taken for granted in America was that if you get a house, at least where you're living, that you have some basic degree of control. Even if the entire world slips out of control, if you don't leave your house, you'll pretty much be okay. And that started to erode during COVID. It really started to erode during BLM, and it's continuing to erode right now. It's getting harder to buy a house. It's getting harder to afford a house that perhaps you're permitted to buy. After all, it's really the bank that owns your house. All these things that have been sort of bubbling along for a long time, nervousness about the middle class being squeezed out, nervousness about rising generations not able to create wealth in the way that the boomers did. And now, here come the squatters, and here come the home invaders, and you shoot a home invader and you're going to jail. Yeah, there are different laws in different jurisdictions, but the trend is unmistakable. And of course, the Soros DAs are involved. And these things that are taking place at the local level, the city level, are directly applicable to ordinary people's ordinary lives. And yeah, for a long time, people got used to thinking of, town councils and city councils as just kind of these like linoleum plated echo chambers where the kind of, the guy who never trims his beard is just kind of there, just going off on whatever his meaningless hobby horse is. Well, we're reaping the whirlwind, and these changes are part of a concerted effort to reimagine property. And they're not going to pause, and they're certainly not going to be rolled back unless some concerted action is taken in the other direction.
Yeah, absolutely. In New York, where I am, the left, which isn't in complete control, but it's got pretty substantial control, is really pushing for the decommodification of housing. Saying like, why should housing, which is like this essential, what they would call a right, to have a place to live, why is this in the hands of the private market? What is it that landlords do? They don't do anything. They're just strictly parasites. And so they're really, pushing through various, forms of regulation and legislation, a model of housing that what's weird is what they seek to do is to absorb all housing or most housing, especially rental, into, to socialize it, basically. But in order to do that, what they have to do is make it completely unprofitable, to make it unpleasant to own property. I mean, for instance, I don't want to get hyper local here, but you can find right now in New York, like, a nice building in Manhattan with 25 apartments in it, for sale for like, I don't know, $1 million or $2 million. Now that sounds great, right? Well, no, because all of the apartments are rent regulated, so you can never raise the rent. You can't um, fix it up and expect to raise the rents to cover the costs. You can't even raise the rents to cover the costs of rising costs of labor, insurance, taxes, energy, maintenance. So, and the left has been pretty open about the fact that what they seek is for private owners to walk away from their buildings, and for the city to be able to take them over, as happened in the 70s, but this time not try to fix. This time we're going to keep them, and we're going to essentially extend public housing throughout the whole city. But this will necessitate, or it will involve, the dilapidation of much of the housing stock. It's a terrible, terrible trend, but a lot of people don't really seem to have keyed in to seeing what's happening here. But no, it is so for them, like people squatting, it's like, well, okay.
Right.
They think landlords are squatters.
Yeah, there's no difference.
Yeah.
Are you guys watching The Gentleman on Netflix? This Guy Ritchie property. So it's a streaming show based on a movie about a guy who inherits the title of a duke's. He becomes a duke. His dad's a duke, and he gets passed over. The first son gets passed over, and instead Theo James, the second son, becomes the duke. And this happens in the first episode, so not a spoiler. It turns out that underneath the farm, which makes up his dukedom, his property, there is a giant marijuana like greenhouse where they're growing and selling weed, and it's run by the daughter of a major Liverpudlian, I think, crime syndicate. And so he has to deal with these squatters, but everybody is incredibly glamorous. Even the criminals are sophisticated and sly, and it's a fun romp through the relationship between this surprise criminal and this duke who runs a beautiful country state. I feel like these YIMBYs and these, anti-property rights DAs and stuff, they live in their heads. They live in a combination of The Gentleman, where everybody involved is glamorous and friendly and has wealth to spare. It's a combination of The Gentleman and like Sesame Street, where the squatters are kind of like ruffians, lovable neighborhood ruffians that just happen to be a little bit down on their luck. Mm-hmm. And that's the picture that's operative here, when in fact what you're dealing with is a landlord who is barely scraping by in order to, using this one property and pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into it to make it livable for somebody, so that then he can make a little extra money off of it and sustain this, middle class dream of owning another property. And then some, coked out tweaker or whatever that is threatening to, castrate their child or some craziness. I don't know. I feel as if the reality on the ground here is just completely missing from what is otherwise like a cartoon version of what quote unquote squatting looks like.
Sure, like Cookie Monster as the
Yeah.
as like the squad.
Well, yeah, no, this is of a piece with this idea that, like, well, the homelessness is an issue that can simply be solved by giving people homes.
Mhm.
Just house the unhoused. Simple as. And
Well,
would that it were so simple.
Well, it's kind of funny because like they really don't like the old Zionist line, like a land without people for people without land. Like, okay, that was a little bit like that was kind of thin, but they repeat the same. They use that. It's exactly the same premise. Like,
It's terra nullius. Yeah.
Houses without people for people without houses, and that will solve everything. Okay, well, let's move to the segment of the hour where we remind you that this podcast is part of a website that publishes really great stuff, like probably 10 pieces a week. So now's when we talk about our favorite pieces from the website. Encourage our listeners to go to AmericanMind.org and read the damn site. Spencer, what was your favorite item or something that you think deserves attention?
There's a lot of great stuff on the front page right now. Of course, there always is, but I could, maybe you guys will, I don't know, talk about the excerpt from Jeremy Carl's book. I could talk about our friend Peachy Keenan's latest, but simply out of filial pride, if that's the term I want, if for no other reason, I have to talk about this piece. There is no Mr. Rochester by my sister Faith Moore. Of course, I'm very proud of her personally, but I also think this is a really interesting take based on Faith's lifelong love of the book Jane Eyre, of all things, which she parlays into an analysis of why it is that we all feel so constantly dissatisfied by our relationships in the age of peak online. You've heard people talk about the fact that we are able to construct an imaginary version of ourselves when we go online, the avatar, the profile picture, especially for the trans people we were talking about earlier, the stream of words designed to distract from the reality of what's really going on. This is a well-known feature of the internet, but Faith has pointed something out that I think is really important, which is that we don't actually just construct imaginary versions of ourselves online. We also construct imaginary versions of the other people that we are engaging with. And this encourages what is always a temptation in human relationships, which is the desire to make somebody else into basically just an appendage or a sort of wing of your own soul, rather than meeting and encountering them as the difficult and other person that they are. Love, of course, is about the person being fundamentally somebody different than you. Otherwise, it would be impossible truly to love. And so this is kind of an anti-love tendency of the internet that it pays to be aware of. And also, you'll get a great reading of Jane Eyre out of it at the same time. There is no Mr. Rochester by Faith Moore.
Great. James, what do you think?
I will talk about Peachy's latest. I found it to be very humorous and delightful. It is called Extremism on the Ballot, and the subhead really says it all. The 2024 election is between a dangerous madman and Donald Trump. So really just flips the whole script of our sacred democracy on its head. It's vintage Peachy. Say that 10 times fast. To preserve what's left of our sacred democracy, the extremist must be stopped. She just refers to Biden as the extremist. And it works. It works, at least for the purposes of the column. But it's close enough to real life to give you that tingly sensation. So Peachy Keenan, Extremism on the Ballot.
Peachy Keenan, vintage Peachy, the rural juror, I think is the real tongue twister. Okay, cool.
Well, I'm going to talk about our friend Jeremy Carl's new book and an excerpt that we have posted. Jeremy's new book is called The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. It's currently available for pre-order. It's going to be published on April 23rd, Shakespeare's birthday. If they don't act, white Americans will soon be subsidizing their own destruction. Jeremy talks about the social phenomenon of expropriation based on, race, and looks at essentially the current tendency in America, the demands for reparations, which, as he pointed out, sounded absurd when Ta-Nehisi Coates proposed them in 2014. But, now there are multiple states and localities are talking about this seriously, pushing for it. And Jeremy does a great job of talking about where we're headed with this and what the broader implications are. So it's a great piece. I urge everyone to read it and to pre-order Jeremy's book, Expropriation, The Endgame of Anti-Whiteness by Jeremy Carl. And with that is about all the time we have for this week. If you want to know more about everything we do, you can go to AmericanMind.org. If you'd like to support our work, you can click the support tab at the top of the page. We deeply appreciate the donations that fund our work. Or you can leave a 5-star review for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe to our podcast. Spread the good news by tweeting about us, telling your friends about it, posting our items on social media. We really do appreciate all the support we get, and it is thanks to you and because of you that we do what we do. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to everyone listening. Until next week, we are signing off.